The biggest problem I've observed that's negatively impacting our bass fisheries is guys think going fishing makes them a qualified lake manager. Going fishing will not make you into a biologist in the same way a degree in biology will not help you qualify for the Bassmaster Classic. Fish population dynamics are extremely complex, and you need to go to school and study very hard to understand biology of all the fish and how they interact with one another. To be a good biologist, you also need a lot of field experience, catching and measuring fish health in a variety of places like ponds, lakes, and rivers. I use pond management to try to help guys understand the complexity of fish population dynamics in a simple pond system. Simply put, you've got to crawl before you walk. If you don't understand basic pond system and how those species of fish interact, you can never understand managing a huge lake. When faced with new information, some guys, they'll dive right in, they'll learn, they'll ask questions, but many guys will start to make excuses kind of for the misinformation they've heard on TV and social media, and try to justify things how it makes sense to them. And I call it selective hearing. They kind of pick pieces of information out to try to fit a false narrative. It's usually a bunch of straw man arguments, kind of moving the goalposts on me to try to make sense of what they've learned on TV. And I use learned in quotes because it's not learning when it's false. But I understand the position that you guys are in because I was there too. I've been a bass fisherman for 43 years now, and I absorbed everything, every magazine, every TV show back in the day, everything I could find on the subject. I looked at it, read it. And I've never heard any of the stuff that we're about to talk about now until I got to college and I majored in fisheries management. And just for the record, I went to the Warnell School of Forestry at the University of Georgia. It's a professional program, and what that means is you get a degree and on-the-job training at the same time. It was kind of like being an electrician's apprentice. You go to work and then you study. And I can say after managing ponds and small lakes for 30 years now, this information I'm about to give you is accurate, and it's not my opinion. It's facts as I've measured them. I'm here to help bass populations, and that means I'm here to help bass fishermen better understand fisheries management. Justification of groupthink. Basically what I'm trying to say there is everyone says the same thing, so it must be true. And that's the usual arguments that I hear. The first attempt guys use to discredit scientific information, they'll say something along the lines as, I'm talking about ponds and not about lakes. So somehow that using ponds somehow discredits lake management. But I use ponds for a reason, because it teaches us the fundamentals of fish population dynamics. A simple 2 or 3 species fish population is easier to understand. It's easier to comprehend. You don't have to learn as much biology about all the different species of fish that are there. And you have to learn that simple stuff before you can ever understand, complex, big reservoir management. Let's use an example. Bass and bluegill populations are like a seesaw. And what I mean by that is when the bass population gets high, the numbers of bluegill get lower. And the opposite is also true. When you remove some bass and you decrease the hunting pressure on the bluegill population numbers go back up. Whenever I tell somebody their bass population is crowded, the first instinct they always have is, let's stock some more forage. And that's the wrong way to do this. Stocking additional bluegill or other forage fish into a bass crowded system is a complete waste of time and money. Simply by understanding the biology of the bluegill spawn, we can see it clearly. All right, bluegill spawn multiple times during the growing season, and a 4-inch bluegill can lay 10,000 eggs. So literally millions of bluegill are born into the pond annually. So stocking 3 or 4 or 5,000 more of them is pointless when they've already eaten a couple million. You're just throwing your money away. And that's what I mean. It should be easy for us to understand by using those numbers. You just can't stock your way out of that situation. And I've never heard anybody on TV talk about that, or even on social media really very much. Since most bass fishermen these days are practicing catch and release, our bass populations have become overcrowded. And that means the bass stay small. Usually I hear the opposite. Usually this is what I hear from guys is, there's nothing but 1-pounders in this lake. The bank fishermen have kept all the big bass. And that's false. That's not what's happening. What's happening is all those bass are stuck. They might be 12 years old in 1 pound because they're stunted. They can't grow because they're crowded. Guys don't understand that, yeah, fish can grow its whole life, but it also stops growing. Another problem I've come across is just the lack of understanding of, what fisheries biologists' experience is on the water. First of all, we never get skunked, ever. And it's because we use a piece of equipment called an electrofishing boat. And it works like a fish taser. It stuns the fish and makes them easy to net. It's not easy to net them, but it gives you a chance to net them. Let's put it that way. What happens is the electrical current is right around the boat, and the fish that swim into that current lose control of their muscles. Their muscles expand and contract involuntarily, and so they can't swim in the directions they want to, and that's what allows us to try to, theoretically catch them easier. It's tricky. So the point is every time I put my shocking boat in a lake or a pond, I caught thousands of fish that day. We don't go out there and get skunked. My experience is unique in a way too that I've never worked for the government. I've always worked on private ponds and lakes. The state guys work on the big lakes, the bigger reservoirs, and the rivers, and usually not in the small private lakes or ponds. And I'm not saying that those guys can't manage the smaller fisheries. They absolutely can. I'm just saying that the smaller bodies of water is where I've been, and not really into the reservoir management. So another reason why I kind of stick in that realm. And I've had plenty of experience doing that. I've done 25 years of electrofishing across 10 states. So I think that qualifies me to have a different perspective on our fisheries than most. That brings me to a third point, is understanding how to measure fish health, and specifically for this talk, understanding how to measure bass health. When I describe how to use relative weight in some of these other videos, in the field, I'm drawing upon thousands and thousands of measurements over decades. And by doing those measurements over and over and over again, I begin to see patterns in the data that someone who's never been on an electrofishing boat or doesn't even understand how to take relative weight would never be able to observe. And it's not a knock. I'm not trying to call anybody dumb or anything. I'm just saying, like, if you've never actually measured fish health, how do you know? Usually the argument I see online, I'm measuring bass from a pond, not a lake. So all this information is irrelevant to them. Again, it's kind of a straw man argument, or that's not the right term. It's more like moving the goalposts on me, where, this doesn't apply because of some irrelevant idea like that. Bass only get larger in one way, and they do that by consuming protein. And if you're in a simple pond system and they're just eating bluegill, or if you're in a 50,000 acre reservoir with 12 different species of forage, if the bass is underweight, they're not eating enough. And then we can put with the relative weight, we can kind of put a scale to that. I'm going to do another video. I'm going to break that down in more detail. But just right now, just want to put that idea in your head. Most guys I see online make the incorrect assumption that bigger lakes always have plenty of forage for the bass to eat, and that's false. Predator populations can get crowded in all sizes of lakes, all ponds, and I'm just coming from a place of significant experience doing these shocking surveys and talking to colleagues of mine that did go to work for the state, what they're seeing in their surveys. And that's what it is. Bass populations are crowded most places. So the number one factor that's reducing bass weight is, simply put, other bass. Catch and release has been pumped into everybody's head for so many years on TV and social media. And here's some facts that most fishermen don't know. Let's say you have a 10-acre pond. Okay, you should be harvesting 10 pounds of bass per acre per year from that pond, usually. So to give you an idea, that's 100 1-pound bass every year can come out of that pond and not negatively impact the spawn the following year. I'd wager that everybody watching this video, any one of y'all watching it, has never kept 100 bass in your life. And I used to catch them out at that rate to try to correct this situation. I'd use the electrofishing boat to get them out. And I had to work my tail off getting enough bass out so I could keep the larger bass growing. So, like I said, bass have a tendency to overcrowd when you strictly catch and release them all the time. And I just wanted to make that point. This catch and release idea, it did not come from science. It came from pro bass fishing back in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know, whenever that got kicked off real strong. The problem those guys had was they had poor fish handling skills. We still have poor fish handling skills, but in general. But back then, they killed a lot of fish at the weigh-in, and there'd be dead fish floating all around the ramp down there. So it became a huge PR issue for those bigger fishing tournaments when they first got started, because everybody locally was mad that all the bass were dead floating there, right? Rightfully so. And keep in mind too, that came from a time when most people kept all the bass that they caught anyway, and they killed all those fish, and they still didn't ruin the fishery, right? So I just wanted to make the note that catch and release mentality is not based on science. It's not based on measurement. It's based on public relations for a corporation. And I wanted to say that we owe our bass populations this understanding, and we owe it to them to practice good fisheries management. I'm certainly not saying go keep every bass you catch. What I am saying is, please just take a minute to learn relative weight and learn how to measure bass health, so you know when it's a proper time to keep bass and when it's a proper time to put them back. If I could get everybody to understand that, man, I would be happy. So that brings me to the last point that I want to make. I hear all the time online, it's just false. That bass that you caught that's skinny, that's not spawned out. That fish is starving. It's lacking food resources. And if you measure the relative weight, you'll see it. If you made it this far, thanks for listening, and tight lines.